You're listening to 91.3 FM, WCW in Worcester, Massachusetts, the Dr. Chris Radio of Horror program. And if you're not listening to this on 91.3 FM in Worcester, Mass, and only listening to us on YouTube or VidMe, this episode has been recorded, so there will be no calls or anything like that to interrupt us. And please welcome to the show one of the writers from the Superman homepage, from the Fortress of BAILEYTUDE, and from the Highlander Family Guy, A Crisis to Crisis podcast, Michael Bailey.
There is somebody who has been listening to the show and gets the jokes. Thank you so much for having me, sir.
Oh, no problem. As soon as I started listening to your podcast and started when you hit the Blaze Satanist War, I was like, okay, in like a few months, it's going to be October. I want to do an entire month of Superman coverage and horror. And man, oh man, has Superman fought the horror industry in one way or another. No pun and jokes about Superman fighting like the horror of media or anything like that. That's a whole other podcast. But supernatural beings in horror can kill and hurt Superman. And he fights them a lot.
You know, not as much as say, Batman would, because Batman kind of lends himself more to, the Mysterioso, as Bob Kane would say.
Yes.
But yeah, Superman it's one of those funny things with Superman is that if you ever read a story that deals with the supernatural and Superman, and when I say supernatural, I don't mean the Winchester brothers. I mean... I mean, like, the concept of the supernatural. You're going to get two things. You're going to get probably somebody not in the story not believing everything that's going on, and you're going to get somebody, either the narrator or a character, saying Superman is vulnerable to two things, kryptonite and magic. And you will get that again and again and again. It is a well-worn trope. So... if you're thinking of things to throw at Superman, because there is that kind of misconception that you can't, that he's too powerful, you can't throw anything at him, throwing the supernatural at him, because like, quote unquote, all living beings, he is susceptible to magic and the like.
Hence why Wonder Woman could possibly kill him, because she is magic.
Yeah, there was that scene in Kingdom Come where they were on the side of the spaceship, they were in the watchtower that Green Lantern had created, and he picks up her sword and it cuts her because It's a mythological sword. So yeah, I am a fan of Superman fighting the supernatural occasionally, but sometimes, and there have been some really notable stories, and you're about to mention some, and some of my favorites actually.
Just a quick little side note and a not so shameless plug for myself. Just before we started recording, I just got done recording my Halloween episode for my podcast, Supernatural Creatures and Lore, where we talk about all the monsters, mythology, religion, and history of the creatures that appear on the TV series Supernatural.
Very good, sir. That must have been a long show.
Yeah, we had a real witch in the studio. We had my co-host Mel Heflin, who actually lives in your neck of the woods, and we had a lot of fun with it. And it's funny because for anyone listening, we're not too far off. We're not going off on a tangent because Warner Brothers owns both Superman and Supernatural.
Mm-hmm. And I don't watch the show, but one of the brothers. God, why am I blanking on his name right now? He was actually on Smallville.
Dean, the actor who plays Dean.
Yeah, the actor who plays Dean was number 2 for Clark Kent on Smallville.
I had definitely heard that. Both Sam Winchester and Dean Winchester and Superman have also teamed up with a certain dog and 4 rascally teenagers. That is happening later this season on Supernatural. Sam and Dean Winchester today meet Scooby and the gang.
Well, they just got to get Dean. I mean, they've only got so much mileage out of him playing his leg like a guitar. So
exactly. But I guarantee this: once that show is finally ended, they will roll the Winchester brothers into the DC universe, and we will see them teaming up with John Constantine.
That is awesome.
Yes. The two of the stories that we're going to talk about this evening, in particular, which you said are some of your favorites, are Soul Search and the Blaze Satanist War, which was, I believe, as far back as my memory can go, my first introduction to demonic forces was from a Superman comic book, and the character of Blaze, with her darkened face and her lipless, teethy grin, gave me fucking nightmares as a child. And yes, you can swear on this show. Don't worry.
Well, that's fine. No, Blaze was one of those characters that came up in the post-crisis era that they eventually linked with another character named Lord Satanas, which is why you eventually get the Blaze Satanis War. Soul Search, though, is from one of my favorite eras of Superman. And, you know, when you hear someone say that, be suspect, because Superman fans, to quote Bill Maxwell from The Greatest American Hero, cannot agree on how to make Kool-Aid. So we will not agree on what the greatest era of a particular of the character is. It all really depends on when you were reading it. But that was the summer of 1990.
Yep.
And it brought together a lot of different story elements from the continuity, but it also was this really cool storyline where Jerry White, the son of Perry White,
and like
Jimmy Olsen are captured by the character you were just talking about, Blaze, and Superman literally has to go to hell to find them.
Yes.
It's beautiful. The artwork, you had Kerry Gammill doing some of the artwork, Dan Jurgens, Bob McLeod was drawing, Jerry Ordway, sorry, mixing up the artists because it was kind of in flux at that point. But it was this really simple, like, 3-part storyline where Superman, like I said, literally goes to hell and fights this character named Blaze that got connected with another character named Skyhook, who first appeared in Superman number 15 in 1988.
Yep.
And came back shortly after in 1989. Blaze was just this character that stuck around and gave Superman kind of a foothold into the supernatural. You know, he had alien villains, he had men in suits, fat men in suits, bald men in suits, British crazy toy makers in suits and stuff. And with Blaze, you had this kind of demon for him to fight, a literal demon for him to fight. And what I loved about it is if you just read like the 3 issues, you get a really exciting story. If you read like the 6 months worth of books, which at the time wasn't that hard because it was only 3 titles, up to that, you get this amazing buildup of Jerry White like getting a job at this deconsecrated church, which is now a place, if it was around in the 90s, Manson would have played there.
Which is based on a real church in New York, right?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
But Jerry starts working there, and basically he and Jimmy get shot, and their souls are in peril, and one of them doesn't make it. And it was really emotional.
Yeah.
Especially when this is when it came out that Jerry White is not actually the son of Perry White. He was the son of a tryst Perry White's wife had before they were married with Lex Luthor.
Insert cue music stinger thing here, Chris, when you edit. Okay. Dun dun dun.
I just remember that story because it had there was a house ad that's based on one of the covers, and I'm sorry, Superman is, despite the fact that we've had like a decade and a half of the angry red eyes of anger being everywhere with Superman. Superman in 1990 was not a character that looked angry that often. So when your introductory chapter is Superman rolling up his sleeves with "I'm about to deliver the right hand of justice and the left hand of pound your ass," it was just this amazing cover, and it just set up everything. And the cool thing about it is it was an actual challenge for him because supernatural forces can hurt him. So it wasn't just him going in and saving these people. It was him literally having to fight the demons of hell. Just a great story. I'm so glad you decided this was one of the ones you wanted to talk about.
My favorite moment of that story, yes, as creepy as Blaze is, and Jesus Christ, goddamn, every time I just picture her in my head, I don't get scared by stuff very often, and it's very few things that still freak me out, but if I'm alone here in the studio, which is late at night in the middle of Main Street in downtown Worcester, Massachusetts, and I'm completely alone because there's not another soul around, every creak, every nook and cranny, and every piece of darkness in this radio studio can give me a jump. And sometimes images start flashing in my head, playing on my superstition of just being alone here in this very old station, and Blaze sometimes pops in my head.
I'm not surprised. She had a really good design.
kind of hot.
Yeah, I was about to say she kind of rode that line between being evil and having, to put it in 90s terms, a rather banging body.
By the way, what movie do you think that she's most associated with by the people who gave us the Puppet Master series?
You're going to have to help me on that one. I'm sorry.
Dark Angel.
I believe I'm familiar with that. That wouldn't surprise me at all, though.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, these guys, Ordway and Jurgens and Stern and all them, were probably doing a lot of research into, you know, coming up with looks. So I have to ask Jerry, because I think Jerry was the one that designed her at some point to see where she came from, because she became kind of a pet character of his.
You know, there was a young
young
cosplayer at a convention I was at yesterday who was dressed up as Satanus, the Marvel comic villain, who's now currently in the Spirits of Vengeance miniseries.
Mm-hmm.
And I showed her a picture on my phone of Blaze, and she nearly lost her mind as she has to now do this.
Yeah, you guys had a big convention there this weekend. Wasn't John Wesley Shipp and Amanda Pays?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, buddy of mine went to that, so that's kind of funny.
Yeah, and she was really sweet to talk to, and John came on my show a couple years ago, because once in a while we do a complete superhero show, not horror related, and I had John for 2.5 hours. We just talked about the Flash, and he was
I'm sure it was I'm sure he was gracious, because every time I've met him, he's been one of the nicest human beings on planet Earth.
And this was in 2013, so this was a good couple years before he would return to the Flash television show, currently on the CW.
The Blaze Satanus War was a summer storyline. It kind of was in the midst of Clark and Lois dating.
Yep, just before the Red K story.
Yeah, just about before they got engaged. And I think that's another reason why it's so memorable for me, because I was 14 in the summer of 1990. I, being a dorky 14-year-old, did not have much of a social life. This is before, you know, you had friends that drove and stuff.
Uh-huh.
So it was basically, you know, like me and, you know, my lawn mowing jobs that I would take, and buying comics. And I remember this was one of those times where I was going every week, because when I was a teenager, sometimes it'd be like an entire month before I could get to the shop. But I was going every week, either to the shop or to a newsstand, and picking this up and just being riveted by it, because I was so emotionally invested into the story, into the characters. And I think that's another reason why I suggested, if you're going to read this, really, and unfortunately most of it is not available on Comixology right now, because they're really spotty with their action run on that.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea why. It boggles my mind that there's like chunks of Action Comics from this era that are just not on there when you have all the Superman and Adventure issues there. But it's something, you know, it's not that expensive to pick up, but kind of investing in this era, if you're the type of person that likes to read long form stories, this was really the time period where Superman was taking all three of its titles and having them connect on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And
so it's just a beautiful time to be reading.
And let's not forget how Superman gets to hell is by meeting up with the Dark Rider, the Death Rider, mm-hmm. the Black Racer. There we go.
The Black Racer, yes.
Which surprises Superman when he's just like, I know you are Superman, and you need to come with me. It kind of reminds me of when Jules Verne shows up at the end of the second season of Lois and Clark, and he goes, Clark Kent, I know you are Superman. You need to come with me.
And the Black Racer was a fourth world character created by Jack Kirby. Little goofy in conception. I mean, he's a dude on skis.
Yeah.
But he's death. So it's like one of the things that his power is trapped in this crippled man in Suicide Slum, which is how you can kind of tie it back to Superman. Very well. To be fair, I consider the New Gods characters a spin-off of Superman, considering how tied he was to their in their early days. So, but no, it's just you have the Black Racer, and my favorite moment is, unfortunately, after Jerry perishes and when Superman comes out, he comes out of a volcano. And when he comes out of the volcano, mystic characters from the entire DC universe sense it.
Yes.
There's these 6 characters, 3 on each side. One of them was Raven,
Yep.
which I would assume that most of your listeners who are not steeped in comics would probably know who Raven is, thanks to Cartoon Network having her on the show for well over a decade now. But it was just this really cool thing that it was so powerful. Like, people who weren't even associated with the story were like, what? And it just gets me. And the way Jurgens drew that shot of him coming out of the volcano is just freaking awesome.
You know what'd be funny is that I'm trying to rack my brain of like leading into this is a great segue to lead into the Blaze Satanis War on Supergirl, because Superman doesn't seem to have any enemies. Apparently, they're all Supergirls. Who would play Blaze? Because those guys really know their comics when it comes to Superman. It seems.
Yeah,
most of the time.
Having her on there, I think maybe not having Satanis so much, because I think, well, maybe not on the CW, having a character with Satan in the name probably wouldn't be too much of a stretch at this point. I would want somebody older, not like a young actress, because when they cast their villains, they tend to go kind of young. With the actresses,
the exception of Terry Hatcher, who played Mon-El's mother.
Well, yes, and Erica Durance, who is now Allura on that show,
yep.
which makes me happy. Oh, well, there you go. Have Kristen Crook play Blaze.
Actually, that would be great. Or have Kristen Crook play Blaze, but maybe not use her voice. Maybe use that Sigourney Weaver suggestion that you made in the Crisis to Crisis podcast.
One, you're asking me to remember something I recorded probably about 4 years ago. So,
but this leads right into which is the sequel to Soul Search, is the Blaze Satanis War. There's a little story in between that we'll get to about vampires in a quick second. But the Blaze Satanis War was just as action packed, and I think one of the best moments in there is when Perry's ringing the bell to get everyone to come to the church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Satanis was a character that was a pre-crisis character.
Oh, I did not know that. Okay.
Yes, he was a pre-crisis character. He and a character named Cyrene were involved in the storyline where they literally split Superman in half.
Cyrene, not Siren, the Wonder Woman Greek mythology character, right? Okay.
Yeah, it's spelled with a Y.
Okay.
And so I say Cyrene.
But Blaze is post-crisis, brand new, right?
Yes.
Okay.
But Satanis was just kind of this demon type character, and they split Superman in half, and both halves have half of his powers.
Is it red and blue?
And you had storylines going on in Superman and storylines going on in Action by 2 different writers with this Superman that's been depowered.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe it was Superman red and blue.
No, that would have been cool. But during the post-crisis era, they introduced this publisher of a magazine called News Time named Colin Thornton.
Yes.
And he actually at one point lured Clark Kent away to become publisher. The News Time building in the comics, by the way, this is me getting super nerdy, this is a deep cut for you, was based on the Los Angeles County City Hall building, which was also the exterior shot for the Daily Planet on the George Reeves Superman series. So you have this character named Satanis, who he's a bad guy, but I would say he's neutral evil.
Yeah, he didn't
be the best way to say it,
because he does want to help Superman, even though it's for his own reasons. It's like the X-Men teaming up with a villain to fight another one of their villains, which is the only other kind of superhero thing I can relate that to, because the X-Men do team up with a lot of their own villains to fight another villain, i.e. Magneto.
Yeah, he was always more about the balance of things, and it's kind of funny when Metropolis was trashed in 1994 during the fall of Metropolis, which was this big story involving Lex Luthor, the News Time building was one of the few buildings that was unscathed, and that's because it was being protected by the devil. But he and his sister Blaze get into this conflict, which centers around a character named Foswell, who was
or Fosgoyle.
Yeah, Fosgoyle. Who was this character that took over for Perry White when he took a leave of absence after his son died. And Foswell was not well liked. In fact, he was the one that during a downturn in Daily Planet sales fired Jimmy Olsen, and he just gets involved with this mystical battle in the middle of Metropolis. And what I love about this story is, again, you have Superman and eventually Supergirl, the Matrix Supergirl, and I don't know if we even have enough time to really talk about that.
We'll just call her Supergirl, because I guarantee the Death and Return of Superman animated movies that are coming out next year or the following year, we'll just call her Supergirl, and she'll be the cousin of Kal-El.
Yeah, I'm kind of hoping that's how it works out. But not that I don't like that character, because I loved that character when it was being published, but explaining that to people now is like one of those... When people ask me questions, and I don't want to call them civilians, but you know, when people that aren't as familiar with the material ask me questions, I really have to gauge how deep I want to go with the answer. And unfortunately, with the Matrix Supergirl, you can't help but go deep, because it is just kind of messed up from her conception to what she eventually became.
I am dating a woman right now who every time I'm reading something that happens that I'm really excited about in, like, i.e., let's just say Superman, comic book or whatever, I go into an immediate explanation of like, okay, so the son of Lex Luthor is actually the clone of Lex Luthor with the brain and so on and so on, yada, 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 whatever. She's just like staring at me. She's like, okay, right? Is this in a cartoon I can watch? Because I'm not really big into comics. I'm like, no, it's not in a cartoon, but I'll give you the Death and Return of Superman novel and you can read that.
You're talking to a man that explained to his wife years ago that Superman had a mermaid girlfriend, and she thought I was punking her. She thought I was messing with her. That it was just so far out of the realm of possibility. And it's one of those things where, and I'm glad I have these moments, because it reminds me that not everybody would accept the fact that Superman had a mermaid girlfriend as just a fact.
On our way to our date the other night, I explained the Lori Lemieux thing to her.
Yeah. So and some people are like, that's cool, and some people are like, why would he date a mermaid? And I'm like, it was the 50s. Don't ask me. I didn't create her. But Foswell becomes a pawn of Blaze, and it's actually kind of sad. But he gets to where he is because he tries to kill himself. And Blaze saves him, and now he thinks he's there for a higher purpose. But it's just this wild story. And one of the issues the action issue, had art by a more known as a writer now, but artist named Keith Giffen. And it was just this bizarre style that Giffen had at the time, but it fit the weird quasi-mystical nature of the story. But again, as we were saying, it's a story where Superman's doing a deep dive into the supernatural, and the drama there. Well, you know he's going to come out, because unless Doomsday's involved, he's not going to die. But you know that he is going to come out of this. But how is he going to win the day? And this is another story. I really think they should do a trade paperback at this point of Soul Search and the Blaze Satanis War, because I think you could get a good 8-issue thing out of that.
With pages of the 6 months prior leading up to Soul Search that you mentioned, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just kind of explaining how you get to this point.
Yeah, I never read the issues leading up to Soul Search. I jumped right into Soul Search from whatever the previous story was. I think Exile or Eradicator Man or Exiles. Eradicator Man, that's not his name, but you get what I'm saying. But I was aware of there was a lingering plot line that they were building up to, and God, something else I would love to have seen on Smallville, the Superman animated series, was Blaze or some version of Lord Satanis.
I don't know. The couple of times they tried to go into the supernatural. You got that episode with
Dr. Fate,
Lana, Chloe, and Lois becoming witches.
Oh God, yeah. Okay, I thought you were going to mention the Dr. Fate animated episode too.
No, that was actually a really, really good supernatural thing. And then you had Lana Lang Vampire. Thirst. That was the name of that episode, because I hated it so much.
God. Yeah, and then on Justice League, they actually did a very good job with that whole. I don't even think Superman's in those 2 episodes with the demon, and it's John seeing his wife and stuff. I don't think Superman's in those, right?
What are the Demon?
The Demon teams up with the Justice League to fight Morgan Le Fay in a 2-part episode that John.
Oh yeah, because they're turned into kids.
No, this is the episode before that. These are the two. This is when they were still doing 2 parts.
Now I know what you're talking about. Yeah, the Morgan Le Fay. There's also the Cthulhu. There's also, it's my wife in the background, folks. There was also a really fun episode of Justice League Unlimited that had Dr. Fate, Aquaman, Solomon Grundy,
yes,
Hawkgirl, and a couple other, and Amazo, all teaming up to fight a Cthulhu type character.
Yeah, and Grundy dies, right?
The what?
Grundy dies.
Grundy dies in that one. Now, here's the funny thing about that. That's actually a big reference to a Marvel series.
Oh.
Trade out Dr. Fate with Doctor Strange.
Yep.
Solomon Grundy with the Hulk. Amazo with the Silver Surfer. Aquaman with Submariner, and you have the Defenders.
Yes, the original. The
original the OG Defenders, not the Netflix Defenders.
The Netflix Defenders. That's the name of Netflix's lawyers to get them out of that Chapter 8 lawsuit or Chapter 8 bankruptcy.
But you mentioned that between these stories, there is this. Oh God! If only it had ended with those 2 issues of Superman fighting a Nosferatu type vampire
with a bitchin' cover where Superman's got his neck punctured by a vampire, Lucy Lane. Lane, yeah, which is funny considering Lucy is the Mina and Lucy from Bram Stoker's novel, where Lucy is the one who becomes the vampire in that story.
Yeah, I'm sure that was very much on purpose.
And then I like the story, but I'm not a big fan of the fact they used the Nosferatu style vampire in that, especially since later on, and we're not like glozing over this, we're just kind of crunching these stories together for time, people. Like after the return, I think around the time of after 0 Hour, before 0 Hour, there's another vampire story, right?
Yep. Yeah, there's you have a character named Babe. Oh God, this requires explaining the 90s to people.
You have to describe the hair. Don't forget, you have to describe the hair too.
At one point, Jimmy Olsen was living with his mom, who John Byrne drew to be extremely attractive, leading to my co-host on From Crisis and Crisis and I to jokingly saying Jimmy's mom has got it going on several occasions. He moves out. And he becomes friends with this indie rock star named Babe. She runs afoul of a vampire. And this vampire is if I'm remembering correctly, was a doctor that was also treating Lucy Lane. So in this 2-issue story, which kind of culminates the whole thing, Superman finally goes up against them. You say you didn't like the Nosferatu thing. Personally, I actually thought that was kind of cool, only because, one, Bogdanov and Janke's art style really sold it in the Man of Steel issue, but also it kind of separated it from kind of like the Fright Night good-looking turning into a creature. Now it actually looks like something that is a little more recognizable, but it's not Bela Lugosi, who they probably couldn't use anyways, because I'm sure the Universal's got a lock on those likeness rights for the Universal monsters. But the really awesome part of this was it was not only Superman going up against them, it was Jimmy Olsen and Tim Drake, the Robin of the time period, coming over to Metropolis. And that's what really got me excited, because I was a huge fan of Tim Drake, and I still am to a large extent, despite what they did to him in the New 52.
But he came back in Rebirth and teaming up with his future counterpart.
This is very true. They're working on that right now, as a matter of fact. But you have this really kind of cool thing of a Bat character, but not Batman. So you don't have the baggage of, at this point in the comics, Batman and Superman did not get along at all. Yeah. They respected each other, but they didn't like each other pretty much until the late 90s when they joined the Justice League together. And because of that, you had this really kind of cool angle that Tim Drake doesn't have the emotional baggage of of Batman's relationship with Superman, and you had Jimmy Olsen and Tim Drake teaming up, and in the Silver Age, there were a bunch of different stories where Dick Grayson Robin, and Jimmy Olsen kind of teamed up in World's Finest.
Yep.
So it's kind of a nice callback to that as well.
And that was before, like, years later, we would have Robin teaming up with Superboy, the on again, off again clone of Superman, which is a whole explanation we're not going to get into. Now, what's funny, agree or disagree, if this story with Babe and the vampires were written today in Superman, Andrew Bennett and his wife Mary would probably show up.
I would put good money on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Which is...
I'll agree. I agree. There you go.
I guess those characters weren't really being used in any way when those stories were being written, because they pretty much disappeared after House of Mystery was canceled before the Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Yeah, and I'm really kind of shocked that despite having a New 52 series, the CW did not, especially with the Vampire Diaries being canceled, that they kind of haven't jumped on an iVampire.
They still have the originals
series. So I really think, with iZombie, which is just a fun show, it kind of makes sense that they would do that, because you have the reluctant vampire and the woman he loved that he turns into a vampire so they can be together forever, but she goes crazy.
Well, that being said, this season of DC's Legends of Tomorrow, they have already said, will be heavily in the supernatural, hence why Matt Ryan is returning for 3 episodes to play John Constantine.
Which I'm sure is making a bunch of people very, very happy.
I am one of them, because I do a podcast called the Dead TV Podcast where we cover canceled TV series, and we reviewed every episode of Constantine.
Pilot of that was filmed in my neck of the woods, too. God, they film so much in this area now.
Yeah, Georgia's you're talking about Georgia, correct?
Yes, I am literally 10 minutes from Pinewood Studios.
Gotcha. Yeah, they definitely film a ton of stuff there. There's a couple other cool little vampire stories which I'd like, which I don't know if you'll be covering these in your when Crisis from Crisis returns one day in the future. Superman versus Dracula was in Superman issue number 180 with a very cartoony, but that's the way he draws, a cover by Ed McGuinness, and it was written by Jeff Loeb, with artwork by Ian Churchill, who... Ian Churchill's artwork is great, and sometimes it's not. His Supergirl always really bothered me.
And his style has changed completely in the last couple of years. He's done some Superman stories that don't look like his kind of Brett Boothish style that he had. But Churchill was one of those guys that worked with Loeb when he was part of Awesome Entertainment.
Yes, I also thought,
which was one of Rob Liefeld's imprints.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think his artwork is very similar to Liefeld. Liefeld, I don't ever believe Liefeld was really big into drawing the ridiculous chests of men and their ridiculous arms and their patches and their 90s flair, whereas his women didn't look nearly as ridiculous except for their hair. But Churchill drew his women like the late great Michael Turner drew his women.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, that was a fun story though. I remember enjoying it. It has a very silly ending.
Yes.
Because the vampire bites Superman, but because his blood is solar charged.
Yeah.
He gets his powers from the sun, so his blood is like liquid crack of solar energy.
Oh, come on. That rates right up there with Spider-Man Reign, where his entire body's irradiated, so his semen gives...
Yeah, let's not talk about that. Because that gets really gross when you think of how Mary Jane died in that storyline. No, that was a fun one. One, because I loved Ed McGuinness's cover of the vamped out Superman. I very nearly covered that this year on a show I do called It All Comes Back to Superman. Instead, I decided to cover it's a story that, in all honesty, it sounds like they had a placeholder title and then just ran with it. So when you have a series called Superman and Batman versus Vampires and Werewolves...
yes.
To be fair... it delivered on its title, because you had Superman and Batman fighting vampires and werewolves. Not a good story. Don't really recommend it all that much.
No.
But I thought of doing that one because it was a vampire story, but it's fun. That is available on Comixology, shockingly enough. But no, I enjoyed that one. Jeffrey and I will be covering it on From Crisis to Crisis, because one day we will get to 2006, and we have to kind of go past the Loeb. I'm actually looking forward to covering the Loeb issues, in all honesty, because I really liked his run on Superman.
Yeah, I thought Loeb did a really great job. What's funny is I got into Loeb's run on Superman, Batman versus Superman, I think he was writing. And I got to meet Loeb, and I got to say this to him because it really hit me when his son died, because my son was on the verge of being born. And my son nearly died the day he was born due to many different complications. He's totally fine now. He'll be 11 years old in a couple weeks. So long story short, I really felt an insanely powerful connection to Jeff Loeb because my son was dying in the hospital. And I got to say that to him one day when I met him at a con or whatever. And he was like really, he asked me about my son, and we talked a lot about our kids and stuff like that. And that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, Loeb's a good guy. A lot of people give him flack. But frankly, you wouldn't have most of the really cool Marvel television right now without him. So,
and all the colorful Marvel titles: red, blue, green, yellow, gray. But this man, what was the other? The Reign in Hell kind of comes back to Lord Satanus and Blaze. But I never read it. Did you?
It is sitting in my box. Okay. I have my back issue box. Uh-huh. I went through a period where I bought stuff and did not read it because I was very mad at DC Comics because I was a petulant child. Apparently, I've gotten over that.
I don't think I think you're being too hard on yourself. I agree, and I understand what you're talking about in regards to what era you're talking about, and I kick myself in the ass every time I keep buying certain Spider-Man stories that I know are bad, but I'm a completist, and it's like, oh God, I love Peter David, but why the hell do I keep buying the Scarlet Spider? Oh.
But Satanus was involved with that series, as was, in a really roundabout way, the Matrix Supergirl, but not really. But there was like references to her. So Superman was not involved with that because that was around the time of New Krypton, and him kind of being off planet. They had DC was doing a lot of weird stuff in 2008.
Yeah.
So you also had Salvation Run, where all the villains were sent to another planet and had to fight amongst themselves. Which, if you're looking for a good Lex Luthor Joker face-off, that's a series to track down. But Satanus is a fun character. One, I think he's got a great visual look. The face is obscured, but you have the horns and the cape. And again, he was this kind of. I'm trying to think of a good like Marvel analogy for him of what he was like.
What about Colossus's sister?
Magic? Nah, not really, because Magic's complicated. Simply because she was a little girl that was aged to be an adult by a demon, by spending a time in another dimension with demons, Sim and Nastor.
Yes.
Which eventually led into the whole Inferno thing. And if you want to talk about demons, that's a good storyline to talk about, because it's demons fighting the X-Men. But Colin Thornton was just, never really revealed to be Satanus to the characters, but we knew who he was. So he was always kind of like this malevolent force in the background. Blaze eventually went over to the Power of Shazam series from the 90s. And she was a solid villain for Captain Marvel for the first couple storylines.
Oh, that's right.
and tied into Black Adam a little bit too.
Okay, yeah, dude, I remember seeing her on some covers for some of those I didn't pick up. I've never read very much of Captain Marvel, excuse me.
I would recommend the Power Shazam series simply because Jerry Ordway wrote it, and it was a lot of fun. And if you want to really kind of get a fun 90s version of the Marvel family with Mary Marvel and Captain Marvel Jr., who eventually becomes the very awesome CM3. Yes, that was his real name, and he kind of adopted that name because he can't say Captain Marvel, otherwise he turns back into Freddie Freeman. It's the weirdest thing, you know. His name is Captain Marvel Jr., but he can't introduce himself, or he turns back into a secret identity. Very sad. At least I think so. Were there any other supernatural type stories you wanted to cover?
We almost overlooked the Action Comic Annual #1 by Art Adams and written by John Byrne.
If you are a fan of 80s style horror movies, this is the Superman Batman team up for you. It was Action Comics Annual #1. Literally the first time in 1987 was the first time Action Comics, which was almost at issue 600 at that time, had an annual. And weird. Art Adams, who was, you know, he's an, if you're into comics, you know who he is. Mm-hmm. But he never was like a George Perez or a John Byrne or that type of artists who were his contemporaries, because he was so slow. He never had regular assignments, but he would put out these beautiful books. There was a book he put out in the 90s that I always wanted to chunk out called Monkey Man and O'Brien, which is this giant monkey character teamed up with a blonde woman and their adventurers. So, it's kind of a concept that sells itself. And
yeah, I remember that. Okay.
He drew this really kind of Stephen King-esque vampire story where you had this character named Skeeter, who was from the bayou, essentially, or at least that's how they, the swamps. And Batman is investigating all of these murders and eventually comes across the vampires, so he gets Superman involved. And it has this really uneasy alliance between the two of them. Batman takes out the vampire at the end of the story because, and I quote, "the idea of a vampiric Superman doesn't appeal to me." And, so it's, a brush in with Superman and the supernatural, but any story that ends with Batman digging up a bunch of bodies in Gotham City to stake them is dark as hell. And it's been reprinted a bunch of different times in various trade paperbacks. Dark Knight over Metropolis is a more recent trade paperback that it was reprinted in. I would totally recommend this story.
Absolutely.
Just because the artwork is amazing. You have a villain named Skeeter, which, I don't know, you could fall on either side of that, but it's just this really, like, the way the story is set up, it feels like a horror movie. And that's really kind of hard to do in comics sometimes.
It kind of reminded me of an episode of The Real Ghostbusters. The Ghostbusters have to go to a town that's infested with vampires, and everyone in the prisons are actually werewolves.
I vaguely remember that one.
Yeah, and there's this little girl who kind of looks like, God, could be like Egon's daughter with some illegitimate woman because she looks just like him. She's got like the bug eyes and the blonde hair and like his like facial features. Who is like their guide through it all. And then of course Ray asked the question, "What happens when a vampire bites a werewolf and a werewolf bites a vampire?" And Winston's like, "I don't want to stick around to find out." And as we as the audience are watching like the vampires and werewolves like mutating and morphing into like different creatures.
That sounds like The Real Ghostbusters. That show could get really weird really fast.
Speaking of really weird, just to kind of to end this is something I had brought up when we were chatting just before we started about Batman Nosferatu and Superman Metropolis are two connected Elseworld stories by Jean-Marc Lapierre and Randy Lapierre, and written by them as well, with artwork by Ted McKeever. And these are some of the weirdest silent film noir German what's the word I'm always looking for when you call expressionistic comic books that are connected.
Yeah, you mentioned it, and I felt kind of bad because I usually have a really sharp memory, especially for stuff that came out in the 90s, because that was kind of my heyday as a collector.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading, good Lord, at one point I was reading all of the Justice League books. But what I mean by that is the JLA and all of the members of the JLA and their individual titles. My pull list was out of control, but when comics were $1.99, you could do that. It's a little more complicated these days, but especially if you're a Marvel reader. Sorry about that, guys. That $3.99 must suck. But
talk about things I don't want to talk about.
But there were a bunch of Elseworlds, which I think people are about to get a more mainstream exposure thanks to the Gotham by Gaslight movie.
Woohoo!
That is coming out soon. That looks like they're actually mixing up Gotham by Gaslight, which was the story that was released in 1989 that supposed, what if Batman's parents were killed in the 1860s? So by 1889, he's a young man becoming Batman in a Gaslight-era Gotham City, and what if he fights Jack the Ripper? So this beautiful book drawn by Mike Mignola, and it had a sequel called Master of the Future, which was drawn by the late Eduardo Barreto, which a lot of people don't like. I rather enjoyed that book, but it seems like the Gotham by Gaslight movie is kind of combining those. But I say all that to say that it kind of created this imprint at DC called Elseworlds, where you could take a concept, much like Marvel's What If, but whereas What If said, okay, what if everything in the Marvel Universe happened up to here, but then this changes what happens? Mm-hmm. Elseworlds are like, what if Bruce Wayne gets the Green Lantern ring?
Which was terrible.
Yeah, God, that was an awful book. What if instead of landing in Kansas, Baby Kal-El's ship lands outside of Gotham City, is found by the Waynes.
Which was freaking awesome.
Which is about to be released in a trade paperback next year as well. And in the 90s, they just went crazy with these.
Yeah.
It seemed like every week a new one was coming out. These things were like $6 a pop.
And they even did a crossover with Marvel for an Elseworlds tale with 50s style Batman meeting Captain America.
Yes, which ties into John Byrne's Generation series from later on.
Yes.
But I remember I never read Batman Nosferatu, and I remember buying Superman Metropolis, and I remember reading Superman Metropolis. I could not tell you a single thing about that book right now. It has completely been, I don't know if the hard drive needed space. So my mind said, okay, we're going to erase every memory of this. Because you also had around the same time Superman War of the Worlds and stuff like that. Which was an interesting mashup of two concepts. But I'll have to dig that out and reread that. Because it's been so many years and the artwork was... I'm not a big Ted McKeever fan. But I'm also the type of reader that I'll accept... if a certain artist is doing something, even if I don't like their style, if it fits the story, I may appreciate it.
It was part of a trilogy, Metropolis being the first one, in which Clark Kent becomes the Superman in order to defeat the schemes of the evil mad scientist Luthor. And not called Lex Luthor, he was Luthor. Kind of like the Glenn... I almost said Glenn Talbot, but I meant... what was the serial where he was just called Luthor?
Superman versus the Atom Man.
Correct. Yes. Okay. So Nosferatu, Superman and his Superman hyphen like Spider-Man and his wife Lane now rule Metropolis, not under an iron thumb, but under just like their, it's the future science fiction type of story, so they just happen to rule it. And they are aware of the bat creature, the Nosferatu. And then the only one I didn't read is the third part, the Blue Amazon.
Wow, now I really want to track all these down.
And there was
I'm
supposed to be
sure
a
they're pretty cheap, actually.
Oh yeah, I found Nosferatu for like $2 in a $2 bin. There was supposed to be a fourth one called The Green Light, which was supposed to be the Flash and Green Lantern, the Brave and the Bold kind of story, and they have to take on investigate a Green Martian.
Yeah, that was the thing about Elseworlds is that, like I said, unlike Marvel's What If, which kind of just took an established story and went in a different direction with it, Elseworlds would do a deep dive into a universe. Now, one of the problems is that if they did a mashup, like when they did the Batman Green Lantern story, they then had to mash up all of Batman and Green Lantern's villains, which doesn't always work. But when you get stories like Superman's Metropolis, which is taking the film Metropolis and doing something Supermanish with it, you got these really kind of cool, quirky stories. And the comic book climate at the time supported that. You wouldn't get those today. With books being as expensive as they are, with publishers being so selective in what they publish, you're not going to get the kind of crazy creative things that would happen with the Elseworlds imprint. Though, I don't know, maybe an Elseworlds story would be kind of fun right now. But, we're going to get the Gotham by Gaslight movie, and I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah, and as far as I'm aware, the last Elseworlds story to come out was a Superman story. It was like, what if the El family all came to Earth, not just baby Kal-El?
Yes,
and
that
then
was
the New 52
written by Cary Bates, if I'm remembering correctly.
Was that good? Did you read it?
That was one of those things that I read, and it went into the box, and I was like, one day I will read this. So one day I will read that.
But it is kind of sad that was the last Elseworld story, and then the New 52 happened, and we pretty much had a 4 or 5 year long Elseworld story going on.
That's a good way to refer to it. That makes me feel better about the entire thing.
Whereas Marvel only I don't know, a couple of years ago they brought back all the what ifs, and then they stopped doing it, and it's like, okay, that's interesting. And now IDW is doing what if style things with like, what if Optimus Prime lived? What if Cobra took over the United States? Which is kind of cool because if you're a hardcore, 80s toy fan, you're getting to see these like stories brought into a whole new light in different ways as well.
Absolutely.
They did it with Star Wars as well. What if Luke didn't blow up the Death Star is the best of the three they did because it's fucking great.
That was the Infinities.
Yes, and
series,
the three that they
correctly.
did, the first one is still the best one. What if Luke had not blown up the Death Star? And it's
Because if I'm remembering correctly, at the end of the Jedi one, Vader lives and puts on a white-colored Darth Vader outfit.
Yeah, and Han is blind, and yeah, so it's just like, wow, we're just open our arms and let Vader in for a hug? Is this like the what? Are we? No. He should die. Redemption through death. Anyway. I think that's pretty much all the supernatural Superman stories that I can think of.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch. There was one that...
Gods and Monsters, the animated movie where we get even though Superman's not fighting anyone supernatural, he teams up with the Kirk Langstrom, played by the guy who played Dexter, Batman. Vampire.
Yeah, with Benjamin Bratt as the Superman of that universe is the son of Zod.
Yes.
Not the son of Jor-El. Yeah, I have that. And I was really interested because they released 3 animated shorts.
Yes.
On the web before that movie came out, and the Superman one actually made me cry at the end.
Oh yeah.
Because it was just so emotional. But no,
and the Batman story, by the way, is fucking creepy.
There's there's a bunch of different ones. There's a really cool story right at the dawn of the post-crisis era after Man of Steel, where Superman and the Phantom Stranger team up. And it's not Superman so much fighting the supernatural. The Phantom Stranger pretty much takes care of all of that, but it's kind of a really solid story. There are a bunch of stories in the 70s where Superman deals with vampires and Frankenstein. And in the novel, which recently got a digital release by Elliot S. Maggin called Miracle Monday, Superman literally fights the devil.
Right.
And, it's an amazing book. I cannot recommend it enough. If you buy your books digitally, it is $5 on Amazon. And it's written by Elliot S. Maggin, and who was one of the premier Bronze Age Superman writers. And it's if you want a story that begins with Jonathan Kent having the worst nightmare Jonathan Kent can have about his son going out of control, this is the book for you. It is just amazing.
The one thing I was always disappointed with is, even though they were always trying to make them just Batman-centered stories, the Batman trilogy where he becomes a vampire, it would be interesting if
Crimson Mist.
Yep.
And all that. Yeah, that was by Doug Bench and Kelly Jones.
Yeah. But you gotta think, if Superman had shown up in that, he would have been fully powered. I mean, him defeating a Batman vampire would have been pretty easy for him.
Yeah, of course, if they did that today, Batman would win because, well, that's just the political climate of the time, isn't it? Not that I'm bitter.
Oh, come on. They've been giving Superman his due stuff. I mean...
They are. It is getting much better. I will admit to that.
I mean, his father's back and everything. Come on. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, the Superman books are the best they've been in years. Peter J. Tomasi and Patrick Gleason are writing Superman. Darren Jurgens is writing Action Comics.
And
both of them have just been a joy to read month after month since Rebirth started back in 2016. So,
and I got to say to Tomasi, who was at the Boston Comic Con back in August, I'm reading I'm reading in the trades, but I'm absolutely loving what you're doing with Superman. I love everything about it. And for the first time ever, being a father, I can relate to Superman in kind of a way, because I'm
it's kind of funny because I'm 5'5", and not as built as Superman.
You look taller in your pictures.
No, I am a short person. They were afraid I wasn't going to clear the coffee table when I was growing up. But they, so physically, I've never like I can be like Superman. But when you get a certain writer doing something, I love it when you can feel like Superman, even if you're not Superman. And Greg Rucka did that for me. So I'm glad that you got to experience that with Tomasi and Gleason, to get that feeling of Superman as a father, because it just flies in the face of everything the New 52 tried to establish. They're like, well, let's make everyone younger
and mopier,
and Superman. I have many opinions on Superman. Shockingly,
no.
Yeah, I know. For a guy who's been writing for the Superman homepage since 2001, doing the live show every week, Radio KAL Live with Steve, and all that. I've obviously got opinions, but one of the things that the biggest missteps of when the New 52 came about, and I don't know how interesting this is going to be to your listeners, but when the New 52 was established, DC was kind of starting over, except with Batman and Green Lantern, and they were trying to give like this new shiny DC universe, and they de-aged everybody. So Superman was this young, brash guy. And I think what the New 52 proved, and especially what Rebirth proved, is that at the end of the day, Superman works better as an older character, because he's not as interesting to me in his early days. I don't want to see Superman figuring it out, unless you're doing like a Superboy series. That would be interesting. But I kind of want to jump into it where Superman's got his act together, and seeing him as a father and as a husband, again and a father. I think the reason why the books are successful is that people will accept him better as a figure of authority and of aspiration than just being a mopey alien who doesn't know his place in the world.
Yeah, I am right there with you. When I heard that was happening, we just hit 900, and then like 4 issues later, the Doomsday Wars end, and then bam, restart. I was like, what the fuck are you kidding me? And I said, you know what? This is going to sell, but they're going to go back because this is going to run its course, and they're going to realize the giant mistake they made. How are they going to fix it in the continuity? I have no idea. Did we ever imagine the big blue dude with the big blue nakedness was going to show up? No.
Well, to be fair to Dr. Manhattan, he wasn't naked all that much in the comic. I really feel bad for the guys that were stuck doing that CGI work. In the Watchmen film, which is a film I enjoy, by the way. I'm gonna throw that out there. I'm not a big fan of Batman v Superman, but Zack Snyder with the Watchmen characters, I was kind of on board with. So,
every time I kept seeing Dr. Manhattan on that screen, I was always reminded of a movie starring Steve Carell and Ryan Gosling, where they're like in a what do you call it? They're in a sauna room together, and Ryan Gosling's got his leg up on the table, and he's like telling him, "This is like it should be bothering you that my schlong's in your face or whatever." And I'm just reminded of that whenever I see Dr. Manhattan. Like Dr. Manhattan should have his foot up on my coffee table. Is like, you should be bothered that they're making me blue and naked, and my schlong is in your face. I'm like, it is bothering me. Put some pants on or Speedo. But I get why they make him naked, because I had this whole discussion with my girlfriend trying to explain to her about the whole thing about what's going on in DC right now, and she was just like, why would he not wear clothes? He's like God, right? I'm like, well, that's the point. Why would he wear clothes? Because he's God. Who cares? So,
yeah.
But she's like, is he going to be naked when he fights Superman? I was like, oh, no. That book's going to be rated T. They're going to put them black shorts on him. Are you kidding me? We'll be lucky if we see any of the amount of violence we got from the Watchmen book in that upcoming maxi series, excuse me.
I don't know. Doomsday Clock might be a little violent in places. I mean, you got Johns involved.
I certainly hope so. I don't need it to be hardcore violence, but I still need it. I need it to be as violent as I need it to be as violent as possibly Doomsday.
I'll go with that.
Yeah. So, and that's a good note to leave you to part on. Michael, we appreciate you coming on the show, but do you have any words of wisdom for us about Doomsday and the 25th anniversary?
Just the fact that it's amazing to think that it doesn't really seem that long ago that Superman number 75 came out. And I remember everything about getting that book. And now it's 25 years later, and it is still one of the most revered Superman stories. And I'm not just talking about the death. I'm talking about everything involving with it. The funeral and Rain and all that. Mm-hmm. And bunch of different printings, different trade paperbacks, one supposed omnibus, another more elaborate omnibus. Mm-hmm. If you've never read The Death of Superman, don't just get The Death of Superman. Get the entire story, because that's where the story is.
Yes.
It's not just him dying. It's what happens after and how it affects the world and how he comes back. And if you don't like 90s tropes, I really feel bad for you.
And get it in that newer collection that came out, which puts all the covers of all the individual issues into the book itself.
Well, the awesome thing about that is not only is it a new edition of the story, but it literally has everything. It has all of the not just the one Justice League crossover, but the second one. It's got the News Time special. It's got the Supergirl and Team Luthor special. It's got all of Legacy of Superman. And, get this, they have all of the Bloodlines annuals in them, in publishing order.
Oh, yay. Talk about a true horror.
Everything.
Oh, boy. Bloodlines, yeah.
But thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate, anytime somebody wants me to come on and yak about Superman, I'm pretty much happy to do it.
Yeah, and I wanted to do it like a niche that fits my show, which covers, again, 90% horror. We go into some sci-fi here and there, but I was just like, I want to do Superman this year because I love these stories, and I've never had any reason to really cover Superman other than like in November. Again, I might do I might give something about the death or whatever and talk about it here and there just because it's a monumental event in comic books, and I love the death, and I will hold it up there as as a this is an event that changed everything for a little while, and I love the novel and so on and so forth. So that was like, and then again I started listening to your podcast. I got hooked on your podcast, by the way, through the Fantastic Cast.
Well, I appreciate it. Andy and Steven are old friends. So.
Yeah. I love
they were
their...
both involved in the Reign of the Superman coverage.
Yeah,
so.
I caught those episodes, but they played your ad, and after I was up in the 40s or 50s, and I heard your ad again, I was like, I should check out this Crisis to Crisis, because I actually do like that era of Superman. That's where I got hooked to Superman when I was that age, 6 or 7 or whatever, and that's when I started getting into your show, and downloaded it like crazy onto my iPod because I was like, this is so much fun to listen to, especially when you guys do the meanwhile the Daily Planet building. I'm like, it's like a time machine.
Well, you can find From Crisis to Crisis, and it all comes back to Superman and a couple other shows I do over at the Fortress of BAILEYTUDE podcasting network, which is at fortressofbaileytude.com.
Yep, and you're on the KL Radio
KAL live every Monday night, or every Tuesday night. It's Tuesday now. I keep forgetting that because Supergirl's on Monday night, so we don't want to record right after the show. Every Tuesday night at 10:30 Eastern Standard Time or 7:30 Pacific Time. We do a live show. Just go to the Superman homepage. There's a link to follow, and you can listen live. You can call in. We talk about all of the latest in Superman. So lately it's been a lot of Justice League movie talk. And Supergirl has just ramped up her 3rd season, so we're talking a lot about that. But, it's really funny. We didn't talk a lot about comics during the New 52, and since the Rebirth, we have really devoted a lot of time to it. So it's everything in the world of Superman and for 1 hour, and you can actually participate.
Michael,
just don't be like the jackasses that call in and be stupid.
Oh, yes. Please don't do that to anyone's show. It's just, use your better judgment when you have your criticisms about such and such podcast and such subject matter. But, Michael, I have to correct you. What are you talking about? Superman's not in the Justice League movie. I have not seen him in any of the trailers.
He was at the beginning of the last one. What are you talking about?
I'm making a joke that you're not.
I know.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, sir. I do appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you very much with everything you've done, and looking forward to From Crisis to Crisis returning.
It will at some point. I promise.
At some point.